I've been filling my Steam wishlist with games recently, and purchased a few that I've had my eye on thanks to conversation around the internet. One of those games was Cult of the Lamb. I went into the game with a slight understanding of what to expect. You're a lamb and you start a cult, but past that I didn't really know what to expect. Now having played through the main content of the game, there are a few things I'd like to talk about. Cult of the Lamb begins with you, a lamb, being sacrificed by the bishops of the Old Faith to try and prevent some kind of prophecy. After the sacrifice, you meet the One Who Waits, who is ultimately the entity that is central to the prophecy that the bishops of the Old Faith are trying to prevent. The One Who Waits returns you to the world of the living, asking that, in return, you start a cult in their name to combat the Old Faith. After being resurrected and equipped with the Red Crown, you then fight your way out of the forest as an introduction to the combat mechanics of the game, before returning to a safe area to begin building your cult. Ultimately, the gameplay of Cult of the Lamb is split between roguelike dungeon crawling, called Crusades, and the colony sim aspect of managing your cult. Immediately out of the gate, I was impressed with the soundtrack and art direction, and was curious to see how things played out as I got further into the game. As you progress through the game, you find out more backstory about the bishops of the Old Faith, and clues as to what the One Who Waits plans to do when they are defeated. All the characters in Cult of the Lamb are cute little animals, which presents both a likeness to Animal Crossing and a level of irony, because the game is focused on constructing an eldritch cult to combat other eldritch entities. The colony sim aspect of the game is pretty standard. You can gather resources in your crusades, or by having your followers gather resources. These resources are spent on buildings that can be used to keep your followers happy, or decorative items that can add ambiance. The main metrics that you need to maintain as the cult leader are general faith, hunger, and cleanliness of the camp. Followers also age and eventually pass on, meaning you do need to be relatively active in your recruitment of followers. As your cult and their faith in you as a leader grows, you unlock more buildings that enable more tasks for your followers to do, and more upgrades for your crusades against the Old Faith. The crusades are also pretty standard for the roguelike formula. You venture out into procedurally generated room-based dungeons where you fight enemies, gather resources, and recruit new followers. You need a specific number of followers to unlock the other dungeons, and they do continue working around the camp even when you're out on your crusades. After clearing a map, you then get to choose from a branching path of nodes as you progress to the final encounter of the dungeon. These nodes can be single rooms of only resources, random events, or another multiple room combat map that you must fight through to find the exit. As you fight through the dungeon, you can obtain tarot cards that'll give you buffs for the remainder of the run. These tarot cards seem to only be found in combat dungeons or specific tarot card nodes, which provides an incentive to fully explore a combat map instead of speeding through or focusing on just collecting resources. There are also additional tarot cards that can be unlocked by purchasing them from vendors outside the dungeons. The final encounter of a dungeon is a boss fight. This boss is either a mini-boss that will yield an additional follower when defeated, or be a bishop of the Old Faith if you have successfully completed the area enough times. There isn't much else to discuss about the gameplay, except maybe the indie hallmark fishing minigame, so let's move on to my thoughts and experiences with Cult of the Lamb. At the beginning of my time with Cult of the Lamb, I was very impressed with the visuals and soundtrack of the game. You start with learning the combat mechanics, and then you ease into managing your cult. But as things progressed, I found that neither of these things were particularly good. That's not to say that they're bad, but really nothing stands out as impressive in my eye. Managing the cult early on is a bit tedious because there are very few tasks that you can automate with your followers. This then provides motivation to unlock more nodes on the Divine Inspiration tree, but these nodes typically unlock a part of the process. For example, in order to grow your crops, you need to plant the seed, water the seed daily, and harvest the crop. At first, your followers can do none of these things. The farming station unlocks the ability to have your followers plant and water seeds, but you still need to harvest the crops until you unlock the next tier of the farming station. This means if you're trying to grow enough food to make sure your cult stays well fed, you can spend a significant amount of time just harvesting crops. This wouldn't be as annoying if you could unlock the Divine Inspiration tree more quickly, but the means of gathering devotion are waiting for your followers to worship you, increasing your followers' loyalty, or stealing paltry amounts from the bishops in the dungeons. This left me feeling annoyed with the cult management at a point, because if I wanted the cult to be more self-sufficient so I could focus on crusading, I needed to sit around the cult and wait. The only thing that does progress through crusading is the narrative. On the topic of crusading, this also falls a bit short in my opinion. On your first few passes through a dungeon, you have the goal of defeating the Bishop of the Old Faith, but once they're defeated, there isn't much to gain from clearing the dungeon again. Crusading then only exists to provide you with resources and unlock blueprints for decorative items to place around your settlement. The dungeons are varied with enemy types that change for each area, but still end up feeling a bit samey because the combat does very little to stand out. You have weapons and curses as the main variety of driver for combat, but the weapons can be boiled down to typical archetypes. Some weapons are fast and weak with a shorter reach, and others are slow and strong with a longer reach. There are type modifiers that you can unlock, such as vampiric or poisonous, but they did very little in terms of actually differentiating the experiences. Often I could dispatch the room of enemies before I noticed any effect that was on my weapon. The curses, on the other hand, do all feel pretty good. You have a similar structure of having a base set of curse types that can possess type modifiers, but the curses were very satisfying to use and did affect my decision making. The curses are different enough that I would often consider which curse I had when approaching a combat scenario, whereas with the weapons, I really only cared about the damage and getting close enough to hit enemies. Unfortunately, in my eyes, this is the main issue with Cult of the Lamb. There's lots of trying and not enough excelling. Doctrines feel very binary good or evil. The dark themes juxtaposed against the cute aesthetic can feel juvenile at times, and I feel like I'm supposed to care about the cultists to some degree, but it's hard to do that when they're giving me side quests to feed bowls of poop to one another as a joke. I'm not trying to rip on Cult of the Lamb too much. It is a solid game overall. I'm just disappointed to feel so indifferent about a game that was initially so visually interesting and with such a good soundtrack. It feels like rather than having multiple pillars work together to build an elevated experience, it's closer to different pieces glued together perfectly in line with one another. It's interesting at first, but quickly becomes dull and cumbersome. So much so, in fact, that even though I finished the game, it was slightly out of desperation to be able to move on to something else. Which sounds a bit harsh, but I'm willing to admit maybe it's my own fault for finally buying Shovel Knight. Cult of the Lamb is by no means a bad game, but for me personally, it's difficult to recommend to people when there are other games that execute the pieces better. There are both better roguelike dungeon crawlers and better colony sims, but if you want a game that has both, then Cult of the Lamb is worth checking out. Thanks for watching, take care, and remember, keep having fun.